Yeah, I'm worried about my lighting here, Michelle.
You look great.
Yeah, you look better than in person.
Oh,
Do you have the pretty filter on?
Now I feel self-conscious because I don't look as good.
I got the look handsome, hunkish, and 20-year-old filter on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Welcome to Talk Tennis. Today, I am so excited because two of my favorites and your favorites are back. We have Crawford Lindsay, the TWU professor, and J-Dub Jonathan Wolf, the badass string racket extraordinaire, joining us again on the podcast. Thanks, you guys. It's been a hot minute, and I'm so happy to have you.
How come I didn't get badass in my introduction?
No.
So this episode is going to be dedicated to answering some of those questions that we've generated, you guys have generated, Jonathan's generated, just some of these questions that we've always wanted answered, and some of us just don't get it, aren't smart enough, just haven't dived into the content or the science of it all. So I'm going to go to J-Dub, and I'm going to have you kick this off with the first question.
All right, I hate to start with such a heavy topic, but the universe has waited long enough. Let's make some news. What is your opinion of low density urban sprawl? All right, I'm just kidding.
Next, please.
All right, so here's the real question.
Oh, no.
For a mid-morning snack, would you rather have a maple muffin,
This is good.
a maple muffin, or a fruit bowl?
Maple muffin for breakfast, maple muffin for snack, maple muffin for lunch, maple muffin for dinner.
See, I'm sort of there with you, Michelle.
Yeah, especially when you guys have maple muffins, it's hard to deny the maple muffin deliciousness. But then you got to ask the question, especially for the slocals, do you go maple muffin from Nautical Bean or vegan pumpkin muffin from Black Horse?
I'm going to have to say both because, we got to support
Yes,
all of our
he's
local
right,
vendors.
and they know him at both places, and he's a troublemaker when he goes in there, so he doesn't really want to podcast about it.
We need some sponsors, so call in all coffee shops with good pastries.
Right.
Okay, enough about me.
All right, so
That was a good icebreaker.
Let's go.
let's get into the dreaded science where we ask Crawford questions from a book he wrote in 2005, which I'm sure he remembers word by word.
I wrote a book.
Exactly.
Jeez.
I'm taking notes just for the record.
We in the tennis industry love to talk about feel and touch. Many string evaluation forms have separate scoring categories for both comfort and feel, or
Mhm.
feel/touch. So the first question is, why don't you have tools at Tennis Warehouse University with the word feel or touch in the title? Also, and we'll probably have to take this after the first one, should we get rid of the field category in our TW playtest string form? I mean, are you prepared today? Put the category of feel out of its misery. Michelle, have you ever seen the movie Old Yeller?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I won't do the summary. Anyway, so back to feel. Is there a reason why you don't have like a tool that where you basically provide hard data on feel or touch?
Jonathan, I don't know where to start with that one, or if I can.
Right.
Yeah.
I have my own answer that I've gleaned from you over the years.
Okay. Well, first of all, a racket or a string has no such property as feel. Okay. There's no such thing as feel. That comes from the player. But the player does feel certain things that are coming from both the racket and the strings. One of the ironic things is that anything that you feel that gets to your hand then gets to your brain and is interpreted as whatever it is occurs after the ball has already left.
Right.
So whatever you feel happens in your brain after the ball has already left the racket. So there's nothing you can do feedback wise if you get a signal to your brain that says grip harder, or this feels bad, or this feels good, or whatever. There's nothing you can do about it at that time. The ball's already gone. Okay.
Right.
So feel is something that happens afterwards, and it's an interpretation of what got to your hand. And the only perception that you get in your brain is shock and vibration that happens at your hand. That's the only thing that happens. And plus the audio of the sound of the impact. But the only thing that gets to your hand is the shock and vibration. So that's all you feel. You don't feel some buttery, pleasurable thing that's happening. It's just shock and vibration. And then you interpret it as you would. So we can measure shock. We can measure vibration. We can measure the effective mass or the hitting weight of the hitting location. So we know the effective mass of that point. And these are properties of the racket. And everybody interprets those things differently. And the same properties can be interpreted as good or bad, depending on the player. So there is no such thing as good or bad feel. It's just what you like.
Right. And I think that just sort of crystallizes, what you sort of said and written over the years, that, TW University deals with measurable properties, and the concept of feel is too vague, and you can't put a number to it, and it's dependent on the player and what's going on inside the player. That said, even if you can't quantify feel, as you sort of pointed out, the category is useful because it allows players to parse feedback over and above, say, like the narrow confines of the comfort category. Let's sort of take an example where feel comes into play. When strings lose tension, some players claim they go dead. In actuality, the string bed has gotten softer and likely more powerful, but it feels mushy and no longer has the sound that players associate with a powerful shot. Also, because the response is erratic, the player often compensates by swinging slower, ergo less power. And you kind of reinforce this in your book, Technical Tennis, where you claim that with dead strings, you haven't lost power, but you've lost the feel of providing the power and getting the associated feedback with that powerful stroke. So, my takeaway is that the feedback, which also includes sound, is absolutely crucial to player psychology. I think at one point, Crawford, you reference an experiment. I forget if it may have been in Technical Tennis, where players wore earplugs and they reported that their shots were less powerful. So let's play this out. Imagine being in a match and having the feeling like you weren't getting enough power, even though your ball speed was fine. And so your wires get crossed and you walk around with a confused look and you lose your mojo, and your opponent sees this and gets more confident, all because you didn't have the right feel or sound, the right feedback. So it's clear that again, even though you can't quantify it and put it in a tool, we need the category to make sense of our experience. And it also gives you a place to start digging for answers that's kind of where you're like, if it's happening inside the player, I kind of got to figure out what it is and how much the gear is contributing and how much player psychology is contributing. But I'll ask Michelle this. Have you ever had, say, problems because of the feel or sound of the string bed? Like, for instance, do you use a dampener?
Yes, I've had problems. No, I do not use a dampener, but most recently, and as you know, I was hitting with a racket that definitely had a different sound. And I did install a dampener, and it did change my experience to be more positive, and then even change my whole thought process, and wondering if I should start using a dampener more often.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like something is going on, especially with the number of people who use a dampener. Something's definitely being communicated that's absolutely essential to the way they're relating to the shot.
Mhm.
Okay, well, first of all, you're way above my pay grade on this.
Right.
We're talking psychology and psychiatry and probably biomechanics and everything, physiology. And I'm just a little physics guy. I deal with strings and rackets and stuff.
The emotions are more me, the science.
But with reference to your point, what we do is we try to quantify all the properties of all the equipment. So racket, strings, balls, courts, shoes, whatever. We try to measure the quantity, the properties of these things under dynamic conditions, play conditions. Okay, so what's happening with all of those things? Those numbers are the reference points. They're the baselines for a player. If they look at their racket and they look at the numbers and they like their racket, they look at the numbers that are relevant to them on all of the properties, and especially 2 or 3 properties that are most important we can get into later. But those become their number, and they know that they feel comfortable with a racket or string or whatever that has that number for that property. Then they know that number makes them feel good. And when you feel good on the court, whether or not the reality is that your ball is going faster or in more often or whatever it is that's important, if you think it is and it makes you feel good, you're going to play with confidence, and then you're going to make that right, and therefore you're going to swing harder or just play out more, and you're probably going to play better, and you'll attribute it to the racket, even if the racket of and by itself is making you hit slower or or out more. You'll probably, because of the confidence factor, play better with it. So that's why it is kind of funny that people will say, I get much more power. For example, we always say power because it's just so easy, but you get much more power out of a racket. And it can be proven that that racket is the lowest power racket on the market. But because you play with confidence, and playing with confidence leads to a faster swing without any fear of errors, then you end up hitting it harder and with more power because you're swinging faster, not because the racket is doing anything in that situation. But at the end of the day, in reality, your interpretation of what's happening is probably pretty close to what's happening in reality. So in real life, a racket that's suited to you will have the proper power and will be approximately what you're thinking it's delivering. And the important point is just to know what your power potential, what the number is, what we call ACOR, apparent coefficient of restitution, or we just call power potential, to make things easier. If you know what it is for a given racket, then any racket that's similar to that in that property will probably deliver the same feeling for you.
I know that when you hit a successful shot, but the feel wasn't right, that can almost get in your head and you don't enjoy it as much. It's almost like, would you rather have a racket that chronically didn't feel right at impact, but somehow the shot always seemed to work, and maybe your match results were great, but you hated the feel of it? And if that would eventually drive you nuts so that just gave up on the racket? Because I'm not saying this.
Again, psychology. I mean, you're going to learn to like whatever works for you, probably.
Right, exactly.
But that's a good point because there's definitely rackets we've play tested where it's like, I really don't like this racket, but then I get into a point situation and all of a sudden I'm winning points and it's hard to, like, but the psychology, then you like start wanting to pick it up again because maybe, or you can tweak little things. Maybe if I strung it differently, if I drop the tension or up the tension or hybrid it. So I think that becomes a psychology moment, teaching experience where you're like, oh, relearn.
Right.
To ground this a little bit, we once did an experiment years ago, a very brief experiment, and it wasn't a complete one. It was just sort of a hypothetical. And 3 players went out on the court, and we had a target zone, a regular target, concentric circles, and each one was that's where you aimed the ball. And you got 5 points for a bullseye, 3 points for outside that radius, and 2 points outside that radius. And then we had a radar gun measuring the speed of your shot. And we had a feeder feeding the ball to the player at the exact same speed and bounce each time. And then we had several different rackets that we were testing and had 3 players doing this. So anyway, with each hit, the player we would record the speed of the shot. We would record the accuracy score and the bullseye, and then add those up and get a complete power and control score for that racket. I forget how many times we hit it and how many impacts each time, but then we asked the players after they went through the 3 or 4 rackets, however many we were testing, which racket they liked the best. And of the 3 players, the one that recorded the most power and most control came in last each time. They didn't know what rackets supposedly they were playing with, so there wasn't any confirmation bias or otherwise happening. The rackets weren't blacked out though, so they were peaking. I know they were, but but still, what the control and power scores showed was happening compared to their perception and what they liked was the complete opposite of what you would think.
Right. I mean, imagine what would happen if your favorite racket, I mean, Michelle, your RF97 autograph, you go down and you test it against a racket that you don't like for whatever reason.
No, I was gonna bring this up though, because this happens.
Play better with the other racket in almost every category. But maybe at some point, if you were to bring it into a match setting, there's something else about your pro staff which you absolutely need, so you'd ultimately pick it.
But even like when we're doing play site data, however you pronounce that word, this blows my mind because it's so hard to control. Again, once you start talking about feelings and emotions, it's not a scientific thing. We can't get it on the, you can't measure that, because if I'm testing an RF97 next to a Pure Drive Tour in my head, and they're strung the exact same way, and I'm hitting the exact same, I'm like warm, I'm same exact balls. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, I know the RF has a little bit more mass. I know the Pure Drive Tour swings a little faster, but I also feel like I can hit a bigger ball with it. And so like, I might be like stepping up and trying to put more of my weight in, like my stroke changes.
Right.
Exactly. So I guess, yeah, but now we're really getting.
Right. So it's hard to have an accurate test. But, I just sort of brought up, the reason I brought it up was because feel can get sort of complicated when you're trying to convey it to other people real quick. I mean, whenever I see like a word like playability, which is extremely vague, or again, touch or feel on, say, a string package, I think, well, why stop there? Why not include like world peace or eternal bliss? I mean, there's lots of things that don't have numbers to them that you can just kind of throw in there and say, well, we thought it was there.
Well, and that's why we do what we do. I mean, when you come down to, at the end of the day, we just measure the properties of the equipment.
Right.
And we can tell you exactly which equipment will do what. And performance wise, which will give you more spin, which will give you more ball velocity, which will give you more trajectory, which will have less shock and vibration. All of these things are measurable, and they are properties of the racket. And we take the player out of it. Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, I was gonna say, and maybe take it a step farther as like, what do you measure that can like begin to let a player know how they might feel, kind of thing, like
Right.
stiffness or vibration.
Exactly.
Right.
And when it,
Right.
and so there's two ways to go about using all of our tools that utilize those properties, those measurements. Is that one, you have a racket that you like or a string that you like, and so you want to get something similar, although you might as well just stick with what you like, and why get
Right.
but you can. And so you would go to the tools and find rackets and strings with properties that are exactly similar, especially the two most important properties. In string, it's string stiffness, and in rackets, it's the power potential. Those two numbers, and the closest thing to power potential that would be hitting weight or swing weight. Those three things are almost the same thing when it comes to rackets. You could use all three of those to compare rackets. And in strings, string stiffness says it all. Okay. But so you can look for rackets and strings that are similar to what you're using, and that'll give you very similar results performance wise. Or if you're not satisfied with your present equipment, then you go and the tools are arranged such that they're in scales, and so that you can pick something that's X% more or less of whatever you're looking for. So if you want more power, more spin, more comfort, whatever, you just look for properties that are 5%, 3%, whatever, more or less of your present racket or string.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm playing, for instance, with Technofiber NRG squared, I know I'm a multi-filament player. I basically like the feel of that kind of string, but I reach a point where I want a little more control. I can go to your string tool and just look for a stiffer string in that category, and I can be reasonably certain that it's going to leave the racket with less power and give me more control.
Well, with respect to that, maybe not, because string works kind of counterintuitively, where a string with the most power may or may not give you more power or more ball speed. Okay. And the reason being is that a stiff string, when it comes to energy return for strings, it all comes down to stiffness, and the energy will go into the softer material. So you have a ball and a string bed. Usually they're about the same stiffness, okay? Which means 50% of the energy will go into the ball and 50% will go into the strings. So say you make your string bed stiffer by either using a stiffer string or by raising the tension, then your string bed will be stiffer than the ball. So more energy will go into the ball, and that's a bad thing because the ball loses 45% of the energy that goes into it. Okay. So a stiffer string gives you less ball velocity. So that means all polyesters give you less ball velocity with respect to bouncing off of a racket. Okay. But because you lose that ball velocity, you will end up swinging faster. You can swing much faster. And swing speed always trumps racket inherent or strings inherent power.
That's why Michelle gets more power from Kevlar.
That's what I was gonna say.
Right.
You know,
Right.
mean,
The
this is
most powerful string gives you can give you the least velocity, and the least powerful string can give you the most velocity. I mean, it doesn't happen that way all the time, but predominantly so.
Literally say it again for the people in back, because when I say that about Kevlar, a Kevlar hybrid, people are like, "Oh no, it's the most control-oriented string. There's no way you're
there's
hitting
no
bigger."
power. Right.
Yes, there
Yeah.
is.
Right. Because it literally unlocks the most powerful source of power, which is your stroke.
You. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just, and part of the challenge for anyone is figuring out how they relate to the data, which is great because, you kind of want people to take ownership of that. I like your concept of energy flow that you sort of touched on. We tend to think of things like, this is more powerful than that, when in fact, rackets and strings tend to limit or at least regulate the amount of power that makes it to the ball. So in some ways, they are both sites of power loss.
Yeah, well, power loss is the key word there. When manufacturers make any of this equipment, they're not putting power into a racket. They're limiting the power loss is what they're actually trying to do.
Right.
The amount of energy that goes into an impact is defined up front by the energy in the ball and the racket as they come together at collision point. So the energy is already there. You're not going to make any more. You can't create more during the impact because you have the latest whiz bang features on either the string or the rackets. They're not going to put more power in. They're just going to prevent power losses or energy losses from happening during the impact. So really, you never add power. You're always just trying to lose less. That's what a manufacturer will do with their rackets. The main things that most contribute to limiting power or energy loss is the mass of the racket, specifically the distribution of the mass. So you want again, here's that term, hitting weight or effective mass, the point of impact on your racket at that location. You want the highest effective mass. Okay, so when a ball hits a racket, it's not using the entire mass of the racket. You can calculate each spot how much weight is actually coming into play during the impact. Okay, so the number one thing is you want that spot to be as heavy as possible. So that's what the racket mass is the most important thing there, effective mass. And then the other thing is on the string side is that to limit energy loss, you want the string to be softer than the ball. So that's the way, those are the two ways that you save the most energy in your equipment. Doing those two things, you will get the most ball velocity from the equipment only. But it doesn't mean that you're going to get the most velocity in your stroke, because those two things may also make you swing differently. And so again, the number one thing in the end is swing speed. It's always swing speed that makes the biggest difference.
I mean, it sounds like a stiff string almost functions like a more flexible beam. In both cases, they're sites of sort of higher energy loss. They limit the amount of available energy that makes it into the ball.
Yeah, when the relative mass of the racket and the ball is what determines the biggest energy loss, because when a ball hits a racket, the racket is going to move in four different ways. Number one, it's going to bend.
Right.
And that's an energy loss because the bending doesn't bend back in time to give that bending energy back to the ball. So that's gone. It translates backwards. So the ball hits and it goes back. That's energy loss. That's energy spent moving the racket backwards. It's also going to rotate. backwards. So that's rotational energy that's lost. And it's also going to, if you hit off center, it's going to twist backwards. So those three motions plus the bending are
Right.
all energy that goes into the racket's motion that you'll never get back.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the more mass you have, the less it's going to twist, the less it's going to rotate, and the less it's going to translate. And the stiffer it is, plus the more massive, because something heavier also bends less upon impact. The more mass you have, the less energy you're going to lose in all four of those factors. With regard to rackets, the mass is the most important. When it comes to strings, the stiffness is the most important thing.
Right.
And the stiffer the string, the more energy is going to get lost, because the energy is directed into the ball, and the ball loses half of the energy that goes into it. Strings generally you lose, for nylons and guts, maybe 5% of the energy that goes into it. And polyesters will lose anywhere from 10 to 20% of the energy that goes into it. So if you're directing the energy into the ball, because your string is stiff, you're going to lose more energy in dissipation in the ball. Whereas if you have more energy go into the strings instead by using a softer string, then you're only going to lose 5 to 15 or 20% in the strings. So more energy that you can get going into the strings, the less energy you'll lose. And the heavier the racket at the same time, the less energy you're going to lose.
Right. So it's really just about limiting your energy loss. You actually got into, you touched on something else, which sort of segues into, let's just call it racket shock or impact shock. And so I have a question. Hopefully it allows us to sort of focus on it. Let's say if you wanted to know if a particular racket was going to be arm friendly, and someone was only going to let you know one spec, would you rather know the racket's hitting weight or the stiffness, the RA?
Probably the hitting weight.
Okay.
And why?
That because the hitting weight would indicate that the ball is going to move the racket back less if it's a high hitting weight. So if the racket goes back less, the arm goes back less, and the elbow gets a smaller shock. So that there's the
racket displacement.
There's less movement there. Stiffness will actually increase the size of the force upon impact, but it will be for a shorter amount of time. But because it's a shorter amount of time, your arm will actually move a little bit less also, but the mass is a much greater effect.
I mean, I say this all the time, and would you rather get in an accident with a stiff Mack truck or a flexible moped?
But wait, here's a quick question. Let me interject. So can someone that has maybe a history of arm problems continue to have arm problems with a flexible racket with a low hitting weight?
Yeah, anything that's going to contribute to the arm moving upon impact.
Now, it's the racket. It's the shock from the racket displacement, where the racket is going boop, boop, and like that. In all those cases, your arm is getting twisted,
getting jerked around.
Yeah.
But then it comes down to, and again, I don't know what's going on biomechanically. I don't want to say what causes or what doesn't cause tennis elbow. That's a medical question. But just as far as what's happening to the racket, you can have a flexible racket, and a flexible racket, it disperses the force over a longer time. So because it bends, it slows the ball down over a greater amount of time because the racket is bending backwards. Okay, so this force is a little bit smaller and it's over a longer period of time. Therefore, there's less force and a smaller shock to your hand and your arm.
Right.
A stiffer string bed and stiffer racket is going to make the force higher, but it's going to be a shorter amount of time. I don't know the answer, but just intuitively, I would want a smaller force than a bigger force, even if the bigger force is for a shorter amount of time. I mean, big forces just, I think those are going to hurt.
Right.
And then the other thing, of course, we talk about a lot is vibration frequency. The vibration itself is very small energy compared to the shock. But it lasts longer. So that's what you're more conscious of lots of times, because you can feel it after the ball's left it dampens itself out usually in about 50 milliseconds, which, 51,000ths of a second is not very long, but, it's long enough to feel. The shock is gone within 3, 4, 5 milliseconds. So, so you're not as conscious of it, but
racket displacement is just, creating more force than the vibration that's coming from, say, both the string bed or the string bed and the racket.
Yeah.
And, when I used to get calls from folks and they wanted advice on, how to solve their tennis elbow issues, I immediately went to the racket weight. I was just curious, over that feature, first.
But then we get into the problem of, racket weight is going to cause less translation and rotation of the racket.
Right. Are you going to hit the ball late?
Yeah, exactly. They may be hitting late or ruin their mechanics in one way or another, which would then, make the problem worse also.
And as a result, I was basically advising 3-5 players who were playing with, a racket with a 305 swing weight. I was putting them into rackets with 350 swing weights and saying, you'll be fine. You'll win the collision with the ball if your racket ever makes it there.
But and that's the thing is like each person that's why demoing is so important. Each person does need to demo rackets, because even just me and Mark Boone, we have very different stroke styles, but we like rackets that have very similar swing weights. And I am always like on a play test with him, and I'll see him swinging a racket well above a 350 swing weight or high heavy hitting weight. And I'm like, that's definitely a different way of doing it, like compared to how I am. And it works for him. It works for his mechanics. Mine works for my mechanics. So you can have two different styles and still, so I don't know, just saying, demo, try it out.
Demoing, in the end, it's all about what you like. And like we said earlier, what you like is going to make you play better probably anyway. That's why it's just, again, so important to be able to quantify all of this stuff. And so that everybody has a baseline context within which they can make their decisions intelligently, so that,
So this is, one other question I had about sort of the way the industry labels things. I know we've sort of talked about your power tool, but maybe we can get into it in a little more depth. The industry tends to refer to heavy players' rackets as control rackets or control and feel. And they refer to light, stiff rackets as power rackets. However, your power tool at Tennis Warehouse University tells a more complicated story.
Is this going to be a complicated answer?
Yeah, right.
Well, I was going to say this might be a good stopping point where we can pause this conversation and then carry it on into a future episode.
Right.
Now I'm remembering why these don't get done as often.
Maybe we can package it and turn it into 2 episodes.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, let's repackage then.
Okay, so that's great. If you are interested in hearing the answer to the question that Jada just asked, be sure to tune into
a cliffhanger
part 2.
Right. Okay.
And until next time, happy hitting.
Woo!